You've just recently invested $600 in your first digital single reflex camera. You get home, you open up the box, and you look at some of the control knobs on the camera. You see the symbols AV, ISO, and TV, and you realize you don't know what these symbols do or how they help control exposure on your camera. Then it hits you. You've just spent a lot of money on something that you have no idea how to use. Today I'm going to inform you about what a digital single lens reflex camera is, or a DSLR camera, and how understanding aperture, ISO, and shutter speed will assist you to correctly expose your pictures, and that is the lightness or darkness of your photographs. All these terms may seem confusing, but I'm going to start with the explanation of what a digital single reflex camera is and define the terms aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. Understanding what a DSLR camera is and what aperture, ISO, and shutter speed are will give you the basics of how a camera creates exposure. Digital. That just means your camera takes it stores the information of your photographs electronically. You're not using film. Single lens reflex. That talks about the cameras using a single lens, and the image of what you see, of what's coming through that lens, is reflected up using mirrors and prism system directly into your viewfinder. So all that means to you is when you're looking through your viewfinder, you're looking directly through the lens of your camera. Now, DSLR cameras use removable lenses, which gives you the ability to switch out a lens, so you could switch out and use a wide angle lens. That gives you the ability to shoot pictures of a very wide angle. Or if you want to take close-ups from far away, you can use a telephoto lens. Additionally, the image you see through the viewfinder is the exact image you're about to capture, so your picture will be the same picture that's stored on your camera that you're seeing through your viewfinder. The information that I will be relaying to you about aperture, ISO, and shutter speed was derived from an article called The Basics of Exposure. It's from a March 2012 issue of Digital Photography, which is a leading British photography magazine. And I'm going to begin with defining aperture, which is marked as AV on your control knob on your camera. The aperture of a lens is just the diameter of the lens, or how wide the lens opening is. And this controls the amount of light that enters the camera. The larger the diameter or aperture, the more light that is allowed to enter through the camera. And aperture is expressed in what's called f-stops. An example of f-stop would be f2, f4, f6, and it goes all the way up to f22. The smaller the f-stop number, such as f2, that's the larger the diameter or opening of your lens, and that allows more light to enter the camera. Also, if you select an f-stop such as f22, that gives your camera a very small opening, or the lens a very small opening or diameter, which allows less light to come through. Now, another item that assists in controlling exposure is called the ISO rating, or number. ISO is not an acronym, but what you have to remember about ISO is it affects the camera's sensitivity to light, or how fast the camera is able to collect that image or light that it sees. ISO is expressed in numbers starting with 50, going all the way up to 3200, and some of the new cameras you can go higher than 3200 with ISO ratings. Now, if you shoot pictures in what's called, and you use the TV mode, or you select TV symbol, that allows you to control the shutter speed of your camera, and that will enable you to control how fast the camera lets in light, which is the duration of your exposure. I have discussed what a DSLR camera is. I've given a brief explanation of aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. And now I'd like to discuss how these items control your exposure, sharpness, and quality and details of your pictures. Micah Cummings, who is a professional photographer with over 15 years of experience, was explaining during one of her photography classes how aperture, ISO, and shutter speed, they all combined to control your exposure, sharpness, and quality and details of every picture that we take. The aperture diameter of your lens not only controls the amount of light that's let into your camera, it also controls the sharpness or focus of the images of your pictures. Let's say you want your entire picture to be in focus. You would like to select an f-stop setting such as f16 or higher. And what that does for you is it keeps your foreground, the items close to you, and your background items all in focus. And that's great for using for taking pictures of landscapes. Now let's say you're taking portrait pictures. You would want to select an f-stop such as f2 or f4. What that does for you is it keeps your foreground, the items close to you, in focus, and it blurs your background. So what that accomplishes for you is when you're looking at your photograph, your attention of the picture is on your subjects, the items closest to you, because the background is slightly blurred. Now, an easy way to adjust the aperture on a DSLR camera is to select the AV setting on the control knob. That way you control your f-stop settings and the camera will control your shutter speed for you automatically. The ISO rating number affects the camera's sensitivity to light, or how fast the camera is able to collect that image. And some ISO ratings are better for certain lighting conditions. For example, if you have a good lighting source, you could use a lowest ISO rating of 50 through 200. And what this does is it gives you the highest picture quality, sharpness, and detail. Now if you select a medium ISO rating such as 250 through 640, that's really good for general everyday photography. And the loss of picture quality, sharpness, and detail is very minimal. Now in the situation where you're shooting sports games where there's constant moving, or in your low lighting situation, you would need to select an ISO rating of 800 or higher. What that does is it allows the camera to capture that image quickly. But in return what you get for that is a loss of picture quality, sharpness, and detail. So the higher the ISO rating, the more loss you're going to get in your picture quality. Now shutter speed controls how much time the light is allowed to stay on the light sensor of the camera, which assists in creating the exposure of your pictures, which is the lightness or darkness of your pictures. If you would like to control your shutter speed, you select the TV symbol on your control knob. That way you can control the speed of your shutter, and the camera will automatically control your aperture for you. I have talked about what a DSLR camera is. I've defined aperture, ISO, and shutter speed, and how these items affect your exposure, sharpness, quality, and details of the pictures. And now I'd like to go back and briefly discuss these items. Aperture, which can be controlled by using your AV setting, controls the amount of light that's allowed to come through into your camera, and it also helps control your focus of your foreground and background of your pictures. The ISO setting controls the camera's sensitivity to light and the quality and details of the pictures you take. And finally, I discuss shutter speed and its effects on exposure. All these items combine to control how your pictures look, and understanding these items will help assist you in correctly exposing your pictures.